On behalf of the members of Mission Control, I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar being given by Brian Saber, um, entitled Asking Matters. I think this will be a really informative and interesting presentation. Mission Control was founded in 2018. We're a think tank of leaders that are serving the not-for-profit world. We meet regularly ourselves, but we also host webinars such as this, as well as happy hours and masterclasses and leadership exchanges for not-for-profit CEOs, executive directors, chief development officers, and other leaders for peer-to-peer discussions. So stay tuned in the future for notifications about other events that we'll be hosting in the future. We'd love to have you join us for those as well. The members of the group are shown here. Neil Fleischman from Payday, myself, partner with FX Collaborative Architects, Bobby Giuntano with Recovery Guardian, Jeff Ledette at Letter 7 Brands, Josh Nathan, attorney, Heidi Sidley, managing director of Stone Street Equity, and Claudia Zeldin, a partner with Growth for Good. It's a great group of people, and we're all very pleased that you're able to join us today. So Brian Saber, our featured speaker today, is somebody I've known for, I think now it's probably 30 years, Brian. I was trying to tie it down, but anyway, I met Brian when he was executive director of the Hudson Guild in New York, and I was on the board there and served with him for a number of years back then. Brian is an expert in both the art and the science of asking for money, something that I'm sure you're here to learn more about how to do better. He's a trainer, a coach, and a consultant, and he helps individuals and organizations take fundraising to another level. In 2008, he co-founded Asking Matters, which helps people understand and embrace their unique fundraising strengths. And that's what he's going to talk about today. You can scroll to the next. So I'll just tell you to all relax, enjoy the event. I'm going to turn over to Brian, but please feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat. We will have about 20 minutes or so at the end of the Brian's presentation to address any questions you may have, but put things in the chat as we go, and that'll help us kind of sort out the questions, and maybe Brian will address some of them as we go. So thanks again for joining us, and Brian, it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Guy, and thank you, Mission Control, for inviting me to speak on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is asking, something I have been doing my entire career. Never thought I would, but out of college, I started working for small nonprofits. And of course, fundraising was a big need, and I wanted to help. I wanted to help in the performing arts. I wanted to help in education, social services, which is what brought me to Hudson Guild and Guy. And I ended up fundraising that entire time. I did not grow up saying I want to be a fundraiser any more than any of you did. I'm sure if any of you are on today and you did, type that in the chat box. We would love to hear that. Maybe 1 in 1,000 tells me they did. And I don't fundraise because I love fundraising. People believe that because I've done it successfully for so long that I must love doing it. I must have some secret sauce, whatever. But in fact, this next picture represents me just as much as the one you just saw. And if any of you know of my latest book, which I'll mention at the very end, well, that is actually me. And that's on the cover of my book, which is about introverts. And we're going to be talking about extroverts and introverts and this whole topic of different styles, because in fact, as we'll talk about, no one has it all. We bring strengths to the table, different strengths to the table, And most of us are doing this because we care. So it's within that framework that I teach. I'll never say this is easy work or fun work, but without this work, whether you're a board member, a consultant, an executive director, or director of development, whatever your role is in trying to do good in the world through an organization, a nonprofit, or on your own, um, you can fundraise, you do have skills, and the work is so important because without our work, it doesn't happen. So that's our framework for today. So we're going to talk about the asking styles, this core concept we created, apply it to a couple of different things, how it impacts how you'll talk about an organization you love, how you might actually set up a meeting. How do you do that? How you have a conversation very briefly. We'll talk a bit about boards because every organization has one, and we're all hoping our boards will fundraise. And then we'll take some questions and we'll recap. But I do hope you'll ask questions along the way. I may miss them in the chat, and I have given Claudia permission to interrupt me if there's a question I missed that's important to answer at the moment. I'll come back to them at the end as well. And I'm going to ask you to type in some things as we go along. So let's jump into these asking styles and what they were. And I noticed in the chat box that Claudia said, if you want, take the asking styles quiz. I'm going to mention that in a minute. It only takes 3 minutes, but let's start by explaining the styles and how they came about. Well, they came about because, as a matter of fact, Guy will remember probably Andrea Kielstead. She was a campaign consultant at Hudson Guild when I was there. We hired her. We became dear friends and peers, and we created this together. I now run Asking Matters, but the two of us were sitting back trying to figure out how do we help the field, and we thought we've got to address this issue of the fact that there are many ways to do this work. You know, direct mail is almost entirely a science. Crowdfunding is becoming a science. There's a lot of science and some art in grant writing. But when it comes to building relationships for individual dollars and the largest dollars, it's really as much art as science. And I don't have those slides up today, but last in 2021, $485 billion was given out in charitable gifts in the United States. What percentage of all those dollars do you think came from individuals? Why don't you type that in the chat box? What percentage of dollars do you think came from individuals? Any guesses? Let's see. 90, 70. We've got some high numbers, so we've got some smart people here who know. Yes, they are high. As a matter of fact, 86 to 88% every year. Most of that in outright gifts, maybe 65, 66%. Another more or less 10% from plan gifts, really important. And then half of all foundation gifts are actually individual or small family foundation gifts, where it's really an individual giving that money. So most of the money is coming from individuals. And as you know from your own giving, I'm sure, our largest gifts go where we have a relationship, some relationship, usually where we know someone, maybe where we've been involved or are involved, an organization maybe that's impacted our family or people we know. Right. So we need to build those relationships, and those take in, and that means individuals building relationships on behalf of an institution. By the way, I'd love you to type in what hat are you wearing today? Are you on as an executive director, a board member, a director of development, a consultant, other? What's the lens through which you're listening in today? And I'm going to take a sec to look. Board member, president, executive director, director of development, ED, directors, board members, interim leaders. Wonderful. Chairs, a special shout out. I always give a special shout out to board members, because here you are, if you're on the East Coast, which I bet most of you are. I'm actually on the West Coast, but you're in the middle of your day. And you're taking time out of your day, and we really appreciate it, because without board members, we can't do the fundraising we need. Special events, Nicole, welcome everyone. So there are many ways to be effective, and yes, if you haven't typed in yet, keep going. We'll be watching, and your fellow attendees will. And we thought, well, what are the key elements of how someone asks, what are those personality traits? And we thought there were two. The first, of course, how do you interact? Since it's about interaction. And by the way, we say asking, but as you'll see in all of this, it's about all your interactions with someone and how you do that. So the first one is this extroversion introversion dichotomy, and this is the one where these huge stereotypes come into play. People think an extrovert's got to be someone like John Candy from Trains, Planes, and Automobiles, which I know dates me, or Michael Scott from The Office, or someone like that, and someone like an introvert, someone like Shrek, hermetically sealed, doesn't go out. Neither of these is true. This has to do with where we derive our energy from others or ourselves. And it has to do with whether we talk to think or think to talk. Now, in advance of writing this book on fundraising for introverts, I did a lot of research on, and there's really science behind this. I won't go into a lot of it, but it has to do with dopamine versus acetylcholine and neural pathway. So it's been proven that extroverts are more responsive to the dopamine in their system, which is external rewards, which they get from things around them, where introverts are more responsive to acetylcholine, which is an internal feel-good enzyme. And in terms of neural pathways, it turns out introverts have longer neural pathways. They go deeper into their memories when thinking and coming up with an answer. So introverts tend to stop and think before answering a question, whereas extroverts are thinking on their feet and answering really as they're thinking. This creates a very different rhythm for a conversation, a different comfort level in a conversation, and a different amount of energy usage. So very important fundraising. The second is, how do you interact? How do you take in information? Do you start with data and derive an idea? Do you start with an idea and then see if the data supports it? Are you analytic or intuitive? And you'll see how this in particular is going to impact what it is you say about your organization, why you think it's important, what the story is, maybe why you're involved in the first place. When we put these together, we get the four styles: Rainmaker, Go-Getter, Kindred Spirit, and Mission Controller. So let's talk a little bit about each of these. We start with the Rainmaker. When people think fundraiser, they think Rainmaker. They think of this analytic extrovert, keeps their eye on the prize, goal-oriented, driven. I'm going to close 5 gifts. I'm going to raise $10,000 for my organization. I'm not going to get deterred. I'm going to be very objective about this. I want to come out on top. And these are great skills for fundraising because it's not easy and you've got to keep your eye on the prize and go for it. Then we get our go-getters, the intuitive extroverts, the big picture thinkers who see the world and what can happen. What are the possibilities? Lots of energy, make friends easily, very engaging. So great at building relationships from that standpoint. Then we get the kindred spirits. I'm a classic kindred spirit, an intuitive introvert. A lot of people don't realize it because they think if you're out there presenting and such, that must make you an extrovert, which is not true. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous introverts is Oprah, an avowed introvert, and many people are. Bill Gates is an introvert, for instance. We are feelings oriented. I know I'm particularly feelings oriented. I wear my heart on my sleeve. Everything is personal. I finally decided at 61, that's just the way it's going to be. I try not to be oversensitive, but because I tend to be sensitive, I am also sensitive to others and their needs. I want people to feel good. I mean, I want them to be happy with me. I want them to know I'm making them feel good. So I tend to be caring about them. I'm watching and making sure they feel heard and feel seen and feel valued as donors. Great skills. Doesn't mean a rainmaker can't be caring or a kindred spirit can't be strategic or set goals, but we all have core qualities that are our dominant ones. And then we have our mission controllers. Funny that you're all called mission control. For us, mission controllers are the analytic introverts, the systematic, detailed, really responsible, methodical ones. They keep their eye on the prize. They get everything done. You can depend on them. And they're the most observant. the ones that sit back the most quietly and observe. Really important skills for fundraising. Now, the other way we look at this is through the question each of us asks when we're trying to figure out, well, what's important to us? So the rainmaker is going to say, okay, well, what's the goal? It's got to be quantitative and in the future. So I know if we've reached it. Did we raise $100,000 this year? Did we finish our capital campaign? Was the gala successful and raised $50,000 net? Whatever. The go-getter is going to say, well, what's the opportunity? What can we accomplish? Looking in the future, but more globally, not as specifically. The kindred spirit's going to be looking internally and saying, well, what moves my heart? How am I feeling about this? Where do I want to, like, how will I know in terms of other people and how I feel whether this is the right direction? And the mission controller says, that's all well and good, everyone, but what's the plan? Because without a plan, you can't reach your goal. You can't take advantage of the opportunity. And it really doesn't matter what your heart is thinking if it can't be done. That's great that you think this, but we have to be real. So I'd love you to type in, and we're not holding you to this. What do you think your primary asking style is? If you had to pick one of these four today, would you be a rainmaker, a go-getter, a kindred spirit, or a mission controller? Which of the four? Type that in. And while you're doing so, I'm going to say that, and I'm going to put up the link for the quiz, just like as Claudia put it in the box. We've got a bunch of go-getters, rainmakers that we all have, according to this personality test we created at Asking Matters. Wow, look at all the go-getters we have today. I see a fellow kindred spirit, that we all have a primary and a secondary asking style. So in fact, my primary is kindred spirit. My secondary is mission controller. And the way I define it is that I have a mix of the analytic and intuitive. As a matter of fact, I have an economics degree, a business degree. As Guy knows, I think he'll remember, I actually have an architecture degree. So I have this numbers side and such, but I lead with my heart. I lead with my heart. I don't care to be in charge of anything, but I end up being asked to be in charge of things because of my mission controller ability to get things done. So now Heidi is saying she's a cross section of them all. Now, some people, and we hear a lot about ambiverts in this world, that's a very current term. So imagine some of us are going to be near the origin of those axes, right close to the middle, and feel we've got a really good, well-rounded personality of all these. Others of us are going to feel we're uber this and that. I know I am so far from Rainmaker. I'm down here. There's no question I'm not in Rainmaker. I can see a little bit of the others, which is probably why I end up down here, but no Rainmaker. So you may feel that you're all of them, and that makes it in some ways easier to interact with all other types of people. So that's a really good skill if you're cross section, as Heidi is. Now, partnering is really important in our business. I love partnering to develop relationships and ask for gifts. There are many ways to do it, depending on maybe who's available, who already has a relationship. And part of it could also be, how do your styles interact with each other? Right. So, gee, as a kindred spirit, if I go out and fundraise with a rainmaker, then I've got my bases covered. I've got my extroverted analytic, who can, especially if my donor is a rainmaker, might be able to communicate better with that donor. But so sometimes I can pick who I'm going to go with. But even if I can't, I can look at our styles and understand together how we might best work this relationship. What does each of us bring to the table? How can we work together? And in fact, we don't have time to do exercises in this brief webinar, but I wanted to give you a few to take back to your team, right? So the first is this, right? To have everyone on your team take this 3-minute quiz and then talk about how you might work together. To do this as a board, maybe break people into groups of 2 or 3. If you've got staff, a development staff, or just key staff at your organization, how would we work together, not only to ask for gifts, but as a team otherwise. So the quiz, again, it's at quiz.askingmatters.com. It's available on all devices. It takes 3 minutes, 30 questions for any of you who've taken it, and you'll get a result immediately on the screen and then an email sent to you. It's free, a really great tool. I use it. I've been using it now for 13 years in training. I use it every time I train, and it's a tool you now have at your fingertips. The key here is no one is necessarily more or less effective because they're extroverted or introverted or analytic or intuitive. No one has it all. And I want to share a personal story before I move on, and that is I had been fundraising for 25 years when I founded Asking Matters. My last job was at Hudson Guild, where we knocked it out of the park on a capital campaign. And I think the board would agree that of all the skills I brought when I was head of fundraising and then when I got promoted, that fundraising was it. And yet I always thought that I was a bit of a charlatan in the field. I hate special events. I hate the phone, and I don't like meeting new people. Now, I'm okay when someone introduces me, but if I go to a party, I won't introduce myself to anyone. And as a matter of fact, if you read any of my books, you'll hear some of these funny anecdotes. One in my newest book actually has to do with Hudson Guild, but I'm not going to give that away. Guys can have to read the book if he wants to find out. So the key is we all can be effective. It is the most important message I can deliver in fundraising. So now let's see, how does it impact us, right? The quiz is at quiz.askingmatters.com, and Claudia can type that in the chat box again, and we'll give it to you at the end one more time. So the case, what's the case you're going to make when you're talking to a donor? If you're a board member and you're out with a friend and you're hoping your friend will get interested, what's that story? Right? This case it's a set of ideas that moves the teller and the listener, where in fact, you, the teller, is most important. I want you to understand that people feel they're trying to tell someone what they want to know. This is a key point for me in fundraising, and that is you should tell the story that is authentic to who you are and one that you can be passionate about. Because when you do that, it's going to be compelling to the listener. The listener will ask you questions. We're trying to establish a dialogue in a relationship, but you want to always lead with what makes you most excited. There are 2 best practices. We're not going to go into detail on them, but they're vision and impact. I think the best stories talk about your organization's vision for the future. What will the world look like if we succeed? As a matter of fact, I'd love you to type in the chat box for the organization you're thinking about today, whether you're a board member, staff member, whatever. How will the world look if your organization is successful? Type that in the chat box. So vision, how will the world look? And 2, what impact are we making, right? How are we moving the needle? It's easier to talk about needs. We need this. Our participants need a safe place to go. They need healthy meals. They need therapy. They need testing, etc. And then impact, it's easier to talk about the features of our organization. We help 10,000 people. We have 4 state-of-the-art labs. We have this instead of what impact though they have over those people or through those features, right? So we're going to a healthier Brooklyn, right? And then what healthier people. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about people, healthier people, people with more opportunity, a safer environment. This is where we want our stories to head. But then we lay on top of it that perspective each of us has, that each of us is looking at our organization in a different way. So it makes sense that we're going to tell a different story based on our experience. And I hope you'll continue to type these in. And when I see Zachary say a truly integrated and equitable schools system in New York, amazing, right? And what will that lead to? A world where there's more equal playing field, Where getting a good education, I'm intuiting here, it's accurate, doesn't depend on where in the city you live. If you're in the 10021 zip code or not, let's say, right? And for Rachel, stability, housed families, what happens when families are housed stably, right? When we don't have housing insecurity, what does that do for their lives, their ability to raise their children, be healthy, be part of the community, and so forth? So these are great. And I often say, work on this as much as possible. So back to the story, we each have this one way in. And it means each of us is going to use a different vocabulary when talking about our story, right? The rainmaker is going to use goals and strategies, facts and figures, right? A very analytic, high level um, uh, set of information to show what the impact is and what your vision is for the world. Okay. The go-getter is going to use that big picture, much more general description of what impact you can make and what the world could look like. It'll be less quantitative, let's say. Right? And actually the go-getter, this is an area where the go-getter has often the upper hand in being able to talk about vision and possibilities. The kindred spirit is going to talk very personally about their own experience or maybe a specific experience of a participant or client and how their life was changed and how extrapolating that out, we want to make that impact around in our neighborhood, in our city, and in the world because we have a certain vision for it. And the mission controller is going to say, this is how we do it. Right? We're trying to have this impact because we have this vision. And so this is how we've structured things because that's a way for us to know we're getting from A to B to C. We all tell stories, but they're different stories, whether it be, a goal story, an opportunity story, right? What can we accomplish? This personal heart story, or what I call a plan story. So the next exercise, maybe the most important exercise for boards, is this practicing of stories. One of the things that keeps board members back from fundraising, there are many challenges, but one of them is not feeling comfortable and articulate enough about the organization they represent. We don't give our board members in general enough time to become fluid and fluent in their stories. So I am always pushing a 5 or 10 minute exercise where people are in groups and they're told to answer the question, well, what's so great about your organization? Or tell me about it or something. And then discuss, well, did I get to vision and impact? And can I see how my asking style impacted my case? Because I want you to embrace your own story. And then maybe repeat that, do it a second time. And by the way, I think we mentioned at the beginning, or this from other presentations, but you will get a copy of these slides. And apologies if that wasn't clear before, and some of you were furiously scribbling notes, but you'll get those, so you'll have this as well. So how else might we apply this? Well, how about to setting up meetings? So people always used to say, you have to call, you have to call. There are still people who say you must call, and I say hogwash. I'm lucky that most of my career was in the age of email because I really don't like calling. I call very few of my friends, in fact. I love seeing people in person. I don't want you to get the feeling that I'm some misanthrope or a hermit or something, but I like to see people when I'm talking to them, which actually video chat's been great for that. I don't like the phone. I find it disembodied. And now you're calling someone's cell phone. You have no idea where they are. A lot of people don't want to pick up their phone. And I say, do it the way it works best for you, all things considered. Now, if you have a donor and oh, the only way I'm ever going to reach them is calling them, then you have to call them. And maybe once you have a relationship, it's easier. A lot of the difficult, uh, uh, the most difficult step in fundraising is often that first time. We don't really have a relationship with this donor. We need to call and ask, would you meet with me so we can get to know each other better and talk about the institution? Or maybe you know the person and this is the first time you're going to say, can we sit down face to face so I can ask you for something special for our organization? It's that first time. And I say, do it how it's comfortable for you. I am much more likely to write. Other people are much more likely to call. Uh, I remember running a campaign for a settlement house in Chicago before I moved to New York. And my boss, Ron, uh, he would sit behind his desk. I'd be in front of it. And as the mission controller and fundraiser, right, I had the list of people that we needed to go see. And he would simply pick up the phone and call them. He didn't want to email them. He would, hi, Kathy and Mike, it's Ron, and I've got Brian here with me, and we're hoping to set up a meeting to talk to you about the campaign. Hi, Ben and Llewellyn, blah, blah. And he would do one right after the other. Why? He's a pure go-getter, and was comfortable doing that. Whereas, so please, when you're trying to set up meetings, use the communication skills that work best for you, all things equal. So now let's say we're in some sort of meeting. Now, I wish I could spend hours on this because the other thing we developed at Asking Matters, Andre in particular developed this, is this framework called the arc of the ask, which actually it's a way to have an intentional conversation. And this works for every conversation you could possibly have. It doesn't have to be for an ask for money. Almost every conversation we're going to have in the fundraising world has some ask in it. Would you open a door for us? Would you come have to our site and do a site visit? Would you sit on this committee? Would you join the board? Would you give us some advice? Would you give us some in kind for our benefit? So this framework works for everything. I'm just going to touch on 3 points here when we're having conversations. The first is when we settle. Right. So we've all come from someplace else, or we've just opened our laptops and we're in a video chat, and we need to get on the same page with each other. Well, this is a harder part for introverts than it is for extroverts, because remember, we're thinking to talk. Generally, we need a little more time to get into the rhythm. And so I have found that thinking through some of the questions I might ask at the beginning, some of the more personal, how are you doing? How was your weekend? What are the kids up to? Questions, if I think them through in advance, it helps get me started in the meeting. So the beginning of the meeting can be, as I said, challenging. It is certainly for me as I get settled. Now, I'll quickly say at some point we confirmed, thanks for meeting with me to talk about Hudson Guild. Then we explore their relationship to the organization and their relationship to philanthropy. Then we make our case. May I tell you what's so wonderful about our organization, and ask for a gift. So we're all going to use our tools, right, to tell our particular story, whether it's a big picture vision story or a detailed story about methods to get to that impact and fulfill our vision. And we're all going to have a challenge here. This is not an easy time segueing to our being the focus of attention. Rainmakers, and I know there are a few of you on, you have a rush to close. You're not that big on process, and you want to move the meeting along. You might have to hold back and let that meeting evolve more. Go-getter, you're having such a great time. Why turn the conversation? And that's if you're remembering that you've got to move it on, because I love go-getters because you're in the moment. I know there are a lot of you here. You relish the moment, you're in the moment, but that also can mean you're not thinking of the greater picture and the strategy for the meeting. Kindred spirits, we might put it off. Oh, this is the moment. I've got to make my case and then ask someone for something. I'm going to push it I'm going to push this down the street a bit. And the mission control is going to say, well, I saw Brian's arc of the ask, and the ask is in the middle, and I'm 30 minutes into a 1 hour conversation, and you might have to be a little more flexible. So you can see where the analytics may have to be a little more flexible, and the intuitives might have to be a little more um, strategic and analytic and specific. And then we ask for the gift, and then comes the next thing, being quiet. So type in, who do you think is going to have the hardest time? Which asker is going to have the hardest time being quiet after asking? Which one do you think? Rainmaker, go-getter, kindred spirit, or mission controller? Which one do you think is going to have the hardest time? Let's see, we've got some go-getters, a lot of go-getters. Oh, almost all go-getters, a kindred spirit. I could ask you why you think each of these. Rainmaker. So now this is not scientific, but I have been living and breathing these styles now for 13. It'll be 14 years in May. And here's what we have found. Uh, oh, so a little challenging for the Rainmaker, but the Rainmaker will be quiet because that's the strategy. Yes, as many of you said, go-getter, hardest for the go-getter, a tendency to talk more and doesn't like the silence. Go-getters don't like sitting with the silence, which is really important. One of the most important things in all the fundraising is to be silent after you ask for something. It only, oh, by the way, one of my number one prop in fundraising is my cup. And Claudia knows this well. We've talked about this for a long time. We asked, would you, Claudia, would you consider a gift of $10,000 for our capital campaign? And then we pick up our bottle or something and put it down, and it at least makes us shut up for 5 seconds, maybe even 10. Most people will answer in 5 to 10 seconds. Some people take longer. Kindred spirits, easier for us. Whew, I'm glad I got that out. But we can get a little anxious and then want to add more to whatever we said if we don't hear anything, right? Because we're trying to cater to someone, and we can take the silence as, gee, we didn't give them enough information. And the one who sails right through this is the mission controller, who says, yep, the plan is I'm supposed to be quiet. I'm going to take my sip of water and be quiet now. One more topic, and then we'll take some more questions. Or any questions. I don't know if we've had any questions. If we have, I haven't seen them scroll by, but start thinking of your questions. You can even start to type them in, and Bobby's right there on top of it. So please start typing them in if you've got them, and I'll probably ask Claudia or someone to help me in case I missed one along the way. So boards and asking styles. Boards, we all have them. We need them. And it is challenging. Boards are challenging. Maximizing your board's efforts and impact that's challenging. And the styles can really help us at least understand how our board works. So I encourage you to have everyone on your board take the quiz, give the primary and secondary results back to you, okay, and then graph them out. You can graph this easily. You on a flip chart, right? You can just make the plus sign, put if you want, put the axes in there, and then list everyone. And you'll see here that I have everyone's primary and secondary, so you can see who's where people fall much more specifically. And you can see how even if just 2 people are at a different end of the spectrum, the profile or personality of your board changes. Now, many of you I know have done Myers-Briggs, DISC, and any of those other assessments. This is like them. It was designed specifically for us by a quiz expert, right, who scientifically designed it. But the beauty of this one for us in the nonprofit world, it is really about fundraising. So you get the fundraising and you get the general understanding your personality. Um, I love David's question, and I'm going to take that as my first question. Oh, I see there was one before it. Actually, let's see. Okay, so I've got two questions coming up. One more point on boards, and then we'll be into that. So, um, how does, and sorry for that wonky formatting there. It's amazing how as these programs update themselves, they actually mess up your your formatting. But anyway, so how does this impact your meetings? We spend so much time as board members in meetings, right? Well, imagine how many times has everyone chimed in and um, and then at the end, the chair says, "Does anyone else have a question?" Someone raises their hand and has something really pithy and important to say. That's usually an introvert. And it's really important as a chair to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. I will share with you, I mean, I'm a pretty confident guy. I virtually never speak up in a group. If I'm at a meeting like this or something, I never ask a question. So if a chair, and yet I have some good things to say, I think. So it's important for the chair to elicit everyone's comments during the meeting, possibly ask for feedback before or after, and make sure everyone's included. That has become even more important and challenging, as you may know, in Zoom. Because I remembered a webinar, I was doing a training with a board last year, and someone said specifically, if you have a question, please raise your little hand, right? Raise that little hand in Zoom. And people just kept chiming in with their questions. And finally, they said, "Are there any more questions?" And one woman said, "Yes, I've had my hand raised the whole time. I'm waiting for you to call on me. I was following the instructions." So really important in terms of the dynamic of your board and making sure that everyone's opinion matters, that you take into account the asking styles, and of course, working together. So another exercise which is really helpful is to really think through the head of your organization and the head of the board. What are your asking styles and how does that impact how you work together? And I have heard so many aha moments from this over the years. Um, oh my, now I understand it because my board chair is a mission controller and I'm a go-getter, and my board chair is always asking me for the details and I don't really have the details. I'm looking at the big picture and so forth. So another good um, exercise to take away. Next steps, and then we'll have questions. The quiz.askingmatters.com. I've got 4 books. The first 3 came out over the last few years. The first is the one in the middle, Asking Styles. If you're looking for a basic on how to go through all the steps of asking, from selecting prospects to doing research and setting up meetings and everything through following through, that book's for you. The one on the left, Boards and Asking Styles, was my second book, and that spends the whole book analyzing boards through this. How do you build teams, leadership? How do you interview people based on this, and how do you understand what you might need at your organization? On the right, my third book is about fundraising and boards and how those go together. I wrote it with Michael Davidson. Some of you may have known him. He passed away 2 years ago, but he was a pantheon in our field in terms of board governance. And my latest book that just came out in September, Fundraising for Introverts, Introverts and Non-Introverts alike should read it. Most personal of the books, and really important to understanding the value of internet. So questions and takeaways. While I'm answering these questions, if you can type in your number 1 takeaway from today, that would be great. And I'm going to start with them. So let's see, Elliot said, there's some asking phrases that work better than others. Imagine, consider is an important word. That's a great question, Elliot. I always say, that's what I say. Would you consider a gift of blank amount to whatever? Would you consider a gift? I don't say make, again, I consider, would you is conditional. And so it's open, right? Consider is open. Would you consider puts it in the donor's hands? It doesn't put them on the spot as much. It lets them think about it and get back to you. And most people will say, I would consider that, right? I'll consider that. Unless what you're asking for is just way out of what they could possibly, the realm of possibility, would you consider? I use gift because gift makes us feel good inside. We like giving gifts. I don't like pledge, commitment, contribution, donation, or investment. I might talk about investing sometime in my chat, but gift is really what it is. People are gifting their money. Would you consider? And it should be an exact amount. I can't go into too much detail on that, but let me say that it makes for a stronger ask, and I believe the donor is expecting it. If you sit down with someone, if you've asked someone to come meet to talk about a gift, they assume you have something in mind. How many times, for those of you who have a lot of experience, has someone said near the beginning of the meeting, look, I know you have something in mind, let's cut to the chase. That's often a rainmaker. Um, just tell me what you need. We don't have to have this long conversation. Just tell me what you need, right? They're not big on process. So we need to ask for an exact amount. Would you consider a gift of X amount for our organization? Thanks for asking that, Elliot. David, how is it important to understand the donor style? Um, Great question. Thank you. So it is important, and there are ways to know it. Of course, the better we know people, the more we know their style, but we can tell sometimes based on their what they do for a living even. I find a lot of lawyers on the analytic side, obviously, right? I find artists more on the art on the intuitive side. I can tell based on the questions they ask. I can if they say write to me rather than call me. If they say can you send me material in advance, they're probably more analytic, probably more mission controller. If they say sure, just come by and we'll chat, maybe go getter. So based on how they act, the things they ask for, I can get some sense. And obviously over time, I get to know them. I don't think it necessarily makes it challenging, though there's no question if we're both more similar, we might have more in common and our vocabulary may uh, be more similar. I mean, it helps. I think it helps. I think I probably do best with kindred spirits. Um, and if you know you're diametrically opposite each other on this grid, you may think about who you can partner with, who might help round it out for you. It also helps to think in terms of the meeting itself. If I'm going to see a rainmaker, goals and strategies and such are not generally in my vocabulary, but I can bring a sheet of paper with them and say, I'd love to share you what some of our goals are. Right? You don't have to have that memorized. Or if you're a rainmaker and you're going to see a kindred spirit who wants a warm and fuzzy story, you can bring your laptop or phone and say, I want to show you this 60-second clip of one of our teens who just went through our youth training program. So knowing in advance the style and thinking that way helps us not only it helps us provide them what they need while still telling our authentic and passionate story. Thank you. Jody, how important is it to have a contact to a major donor versus calling directly without a contact? Well, I hate cold calling. I did phone-a-thoning in college. I don't know if any of you did it. I hated it. Swore I would never just pick up the phone and call people. And those weren't really cold because those were alums. Um, Generally, I will never call someone out of the blue that has no relationship or anything. I love to start with an email. That's my, kindred spirit mission controller layout, because I get to lay out the case for why we should have a chat. I generally don't call someone that has no contact with the university. I didn't talk about selecting prospects today in our short time, but Kim Klein, one of a peer in the field for decades now, she would call it the ABCs. For someone to be a major donor prospect, they have to have ability to make a gift at that level, belief in what you do, and contact. how many years I was in New York, 23 years before just moving. How many people said, gee, you should solicit, or we should solicit Mike Bloomberg? Great. Like I didn't know Mike Bloomberg is one of the richest people in the world. Do you know him? I don't know him. If neither of us knows him, he's not a contact. He's not a prospect. I call him a suspect. And 1,000 people are waiting online outside his door to get in. And there are 500 people inside holding us back. Um, it's very hard to do this out of the blue. If you want to risk it, risk it. There's very little chance. Anyone you know, everyone else probably knows, and they're getting too many calls and such already. You really need someone to open the door, or at least to write a beautiful personal email that shows you've done your research and there's a real reason why, so that you get to that initial stage. Um, uh, let's see.
Brian,
Yes.
two people have asked about, you know, how important is it to understand the donor's style when
Yeah.
you're making an ask?
Yes. And I did talk a little bit about that just now. I answered one of those. I didn't think I answered someone's question. Understand fundraising, this fundraising we're talking about, and truly institutional fundraising as well, because you're always dealing with a person at a foundation, at a corporation, even at a government funder. You might be dealing with a council member or a mayor or a senator or something, or they're someone on their staff. So you always want to understand the person, as in any relationship in life. In life, we have relationships with all different people, and we act differently with them. I mean, we have friends who might be more formal. We have friends who might be in a different place on the political spectrum. We have older people who might speak more formally and not share as much information. So knowing our donors is important. Trying to figure out their style is helpful. And I think where a lot of the fear comes from is in this first meeting. Once we get to know people, especially for an introvert, but I think for anyone, because in fundraising, there's a lot on the line, right? We don't want to mess it up on behalf of our organization. So what do we do this first time? Listen. The number one skill in fundraising is listening. I think it's the number one skill in any relationship. Empathy is really close, but listening more than talking. And if you think of yourself as a fact finder and someone who's asking questions and listening and learning, right, then you learn more and more about the donor before you get to that moment of asking. And that can even happen in an asking meeting, right? No matter how much you know about someone, you learn more every time you meet. And you can apply that in terms of how you even present your ask, because you can couch it in eventually. You can talk about it, or at least dialogue afterward, after you've asked it, within the context of what's important to them. So very important to know your donor, and helpful to think in terms of this fairly straightforward chart. Where might they fall, and what might that mean for the conversation? What do
Okay,
you
I have two questions that were posed by people who can't attend this
Okay.
webinar, but would love to get the recording. And as you mentioned, we will send out the recording
Okay.
and the PowerPoint. But the first question is, do your styles change over time? And the other one is, yes, it relates to development teams. Like, how can you, what first step would you take to develop better asking pairs on your development team, whether it's with programs, with internal staff?
Great. I will answer those. And I think there's one from Sharon as well I want to get to. So we may go over a minute or two for those of you who can stay. Would love to answer these. So the first one, can your style change? No. I mean, and actually I researched this through Myers-Briggs. I want to know what do they think? And they say no. And what happens is we pick up skills and we act in a way we have to. I often talk about people who become executive director who came from the program side, and all of a sudden they're dealing with these budgets and human resources and such in a way they never did before. And they learn those skills, or get someone to help. But we make our way through life. We learn over time, and it can seem as if we're more X or more Y. There is some thought that over time people become a little more introverted, which is interesting. I've been reading about that. I think it's more that they're just more comfortable with themselves and might spend more time with themselves. They're not trying to get anywhere. They're not trying to network as much. I do believe we're mostly who we are. If I think back to who I was when I was young, I'm still basically that person. It might be less obvious to people because of the various coping skills and relationship building skills I have. And in terms of the team, just like we talked about the board, I would take this to your team. I think it's important that we value everyone equally. Many of you may know the book by Susan Cain, Quiet, The Power of the Introvert in a World That Can't Stop Talking. There is a lot of research now about how introverts are devalued in particular, because we may not be as assertive, we might not speak up as much, we might not spend as much time at the water cooler, and so forth. So it's important in teams to understand what people are bringing to the table rather than what they're not, which is why there are so many, retreats and staff trainings and such that we all do. And using the styles for one can be really helpful in getting a tighter group, a tighter team, and also in understanding what might not be on your team. What's very interesting with boards, I find, is boards often skew towards one style or another, especially boards that have longer standing board members, because I think we tend to bring on people more like ourselves, right? We have those conversations. You go out, you're trying to interview someone who might be interested in the board, and you have a certain rhythm with someone who thinks more like you do. And you could have a bias towards thinking, oh, that's a better person for the board, or that's a better person for the position. This happens in fundraising all the time. I have people who are introverts tell me often that they feel that they are devalued, and even job descriptions. There are job descriptions that still are written as if you have to be outgoing to be a major gift officer. No, you have to care about the organization. You have to like people, but individually. You need to be a good listener. You need to be empathic, passionate. You don't have to be outgoing to be a great development officer, right? So that's very important for building staff, for valuing your team. And then let me just say to Sharon, what advice do you have for board members to leverage our contacts who may not know about our work with a nonprofit thing? Okay, if I had one wish in the nonprofit world, and I think we'll end with this, I've been writing about this for 13 years now, maybe longer. It would be to stop the quid pro quo where you have friends, you ask them for $5,000, they ask you for $5,000. You ask them for $1,000 for 2 tickets to the benefit, and you're swapping all this money. What I want to see board members do going forward is to have 4 people on their radar screen they're responsible for all year, like mini major gift officers, not just askers, but people to educate, involve, thank donors, whether it's their own or someone else's. And if you have someone who you know has capacity and is philanthropic, the first thing to do is to say, look, I want to get to know you and see if my cause might be a cause that you're also interested in over the long run. I don't want to hit you up for money just because I know you. You're going to hit me up. The whole thing is ridiculous. My organization needs to build a donor base for the future. And I want to see if, making sure more kids graduate from high school is something that's important to you, that might currently be part of your giving priorities or could eventually be part of them. And if you're interested, I'd love for you to get to know the organization better. I'd love for you to meet our program director or executive director or something, and then take it from there and I'll understand if it's not for you. This dragging people along and stepping on our relationships is terrible for the fundraising world. I can't stand it. I will not recommend it to any organization, and I won't do it. And I know some organization executive directors will be upset with me for saying this, but I think as board members, you should tell your organizations, I'm not going to do it. Give me something strategic to do. That's a whole other webinar.
Yeah.
And I teach webinars like that, but you have to have a relationship, and they need to really believe in what you do. And I'll end on that note.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I know everyone, we're going past our 1 o'clock end, so thank you for sticking with us. As I mentioned, we're going to pass around the recording and the PowerPoint. And if you're interested in connecting to Brian, please visit Asking Matters. Please connect with him on LinkedIn. He has got lots of other resources and advice, and a great community for fundraisers.